Thank you. Ms Finlay.
Thanks, Chair. There's a plethora of opportunities for us to prosecute all sorts of things around Tas Network's energy systems. We do that a lot, and I'm trusting my colleagues on the committee to dive deep into North West Transmission and other things. And we talk a lot about our transmission. I'm interested in distribution. What's the estimate of how many pole assets Tas Networks have under your responsibility that are not on an asset register in the distribution network?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think that's one that we would have at the table or in the room.
Unfortunately, we've got a very large array of our team here so that we can answer such detailed questions. I'll throw the CEO to be able to...
For sure.
that one.
I'll start by saying that we have 233,000 poles out in our network. It's quite an extensive distribution network. Those are mostly wooden poles, although we do have concrete fibre and concrete poles as well. We've built up a database of those poles, and over time we're improving the accuracy of that database. We cross-check using a number of different techniques, including, of course, inspection by our asset inspectors, but also aerial photography and LiDAR that we use. We've created a digital twin of our assets and the network, which allows us to cross-check our systems. We purge through our systems reasonably regularly, but there's always the case with such a large number of poles that there can be confusion, and there may be some poles that have slipped through, and when we find those, we put them, of course, into our database. A number of years ago, we did a big, serious flush through of our assets. I believe we found of the order of 60 poles that were mislabeled. They were labelled as Telstra poles, where there actually are poles. So we corrected that. So in estimate terms, it's a very, very small percentage that may be unaccounted for out there. But of course, we have systems and processes to check and to try and address that issue when we find them.
So there's not an ongoing program or a project around finding classes of poles that it might have come across into your responsibility, like Telstra poles, for instance. So pretty much for the best available technology and inspections of the 233,000 poles in your responsibility, other than a small number, under 60, like a small number, you're fairly confident that you've got all of the poles?
Yeah, we are confident. Of course, that's not all the electric poles on the wooden poles or otherwise.
But just the ones that you're responsible for.
Exactly.
So thank you, because I thought it might have been a bigger number. So then of all of the poles in your responsibility, what percentage of poles wouldn't have been audited or inspected, say, in the last 3 years?
So we have a regular inspection cycle of all of our assets, including the wooden poles. We have both visual inspection and actual inspections where we touch or drill or examine assets. So there's a regular cycle.
What is the required cycle?
So if I could just hand over to give some of the details.
Yes, just to that. So it's a 5-yearly cycle.
And that's on each of the different classification of poles. So whether they're wooden, you talked about composite and other more modern types of poles. All poles are on a 5-year cycle?
So the 5-yearly cycle is specific to the wooden pole fleet. As Sean said, or the CEO said, particularly around the visual inspection and the drilling. We'll just have to get the cycle for the composite or the concrete.
If you could, that would be great. Yeah. Thank you, through you, Minister.
Mr Bailey.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, through you, of the 233,000 poles in the distribution network, how many poles aren't audited within the 5-year period?
Thanks. Sean?
So we inspect the phrase we would use would be inspect. We would inspect poles on all of them on that 5-year cycle. So some of them would be just a visual. Some, as I said, we would actually test and drill. But across all of our work programs, every year we have a program of work, and that is at the heart of our program of work, to go out and do those inspections. So we've dedicated asset inspectors who go. Our crews visit sites all the time, of course. So we go through that cycle in 5 years. So
you're confident that all of the poles are always audited to standard?
Always inspected, and we we try and make sure that our inspection techniques are modern. We've improved those over time as well. We are dealing in the main with a natural product in wood in those poles, and there are variable environmental conditions out there as well that can impact those poles. So we have very knowledgeable inspectors, and we are members of various different professional organisations that we learn from, and we inspect all of those, and we improve our techniques.
What's the minimum standard that would see a pole fail an inspection and need to be replaced? What are the minimum standards?
So there's a range of different concerns that might cause a pole to fail. The most obvious things are like a split on the pole, or if the pole is leaning, or if there is evidence of degradation, or when we do the inspection using our drill kit, if it shows a percentage of non-good wood. So we have a technique where we drill and we ultrasound. We also used to use tap and test, but nowadays we use more drills, and it gives a certain percentage of good wood in a pole. And if that falls below a certain level, then that pole would be condemned, and then we would replace that pole. And we work through we would declare it as a fault, and we would replace that then with the next available crew.
And the time from identifying a faulty pole with an inspection to a program of work to have them replaced, is there a minimum standard to replacing a pole that fails inspection?
So it depends on what has failed. So some poles we can band and reinforce, or we stay them, and that will give an extension of life. Some poles we put in will fail, but they are sufficiently good still that we would put them into our ordinary program of work. Some of the defects that we find are a failure immediately, and we would then indicate them as a fault, and they would be replaced then with the fault crew. So that would be within a couple of days that we'd go out and replace.
How many poles within the 5-year inspection cycle fail? So not being identified as not meeting the minimum standards, but that have failed without taking outside storm events. So in a non-storm environment, how many poles have failed in the Tas Network system that have been within the inspection period, but not identified for immediate replacement?
So just so I understand your question, so during in an ordinary course of a year, when we inspect
regular weather events,
leaving storms aside, how many poles fail? Is that your question? Okay, we can get you an average on that. I don't. Do you have the number?
Yeah, we do have some information on that.
Thank you.
So our current failure rate of wood poles is about, and this is in high numbers, so bear with me, but is around 0.75 in 10,000 over the 5-year. That's the number of inspections. So that's the failure.
Sorry, what are you telling? Number of inspections?
So the failure rate is 0.75 in 10,000.
They fail the minimum standard when they're being inspected.
Yep.
And so my question is...
Last question.
Yeah, so this is the question though. So not in inspections, but what's the failure rate of poles within their inspected time frame that they're not being inspected and you identify a fault that they don't meet the minimum standard, but the poles that fail? So, for instance, just recently in Lagana, there was a pole that just fell over. I know that safety is important. So what I'm trying to understand is what is the risk to teams at Tas Network and what is the community risk about the current integrity of the pole network in the distribution network for Tas Networks. That's what I'm trying to understand.
So occasionally we do have poles that fail. And of course, each one of those that happens, we do a detailed investigation about it. And those investigations help us then improve our techniques. It's a relatively rare event, and it's perhaps 1 or 2 a year, but we can get the exact number.
Sorry, we can provide that information.
Okay, great,
for you.
great.
So you're talking about, through the Minister, unassisted pole failures. So
That's the language.
That's the language. So in 2024, we had 20 unassisted pole failures, which is higher than the preceding couple of years. But also when we benchmark Tas Networks, that works through, I think, in 1 in 20,000 poles as a unassisted pole failure rate. What we've been doing is a lot of research on how does that compare with our peer group, and that average, we're sort of well within the average of that. So
Have you got the last 5 years there?
We'll move on. Like, we just, I mean,
It's the question
you have
that I
asked
wanted
a lot of
answered,
questions.
and there is an answer here. Could you
Yep.
table the chart of unassisted pole failures?
through the Minister, we have that here.
You happy for that?
Thank you.
Certainly.
Mr. Bailey, Ms. Finlay.
Chair, thank you. And so that's the segue just to the question about, I'm not sure, did a chart get tabled before around the unassisted pole failings?
I'm not sure that it did.
We don't have a hard copy, so
Right, okay. So I'll put a question on notice then. So if I can just give some more, through you, Minister, some more context to the ask. So if it is something that you're going to provide that's online, could you outline for me the number of unassisted pole failures each year for the last 10 years? And of that, with the investigations that you've done after the pole failings, what number of poles were timber or new poles? Like I think you called them composite or other technologies. How many of those poles were in fact inspected in the 5 years that they were required to be inspected? And how many of those poles, I think the CEO used the word banded, which I'm assuming visually means this way, but often poles have something that they're supported that way. How many of the poles failed above, so when a pole is supported, whatever the upways thing is called, failed above that moment? To understand, you use the word managing the assets with an acceptable cost, and I'm interested whether with the competing pressures of creating the lowest possible price, returning dividends to the state, which is the line of questioning Mr. Bailey's been asking, and of course you're entering or you're deep in a chapter of capital expenditure and investment. Has there been, perhaps is it included already in a report of unassisted pole failings, and could you table, along with that chart, a report that shows the outcomes of your investigations post-pole failure?
I can provide the stats for the last 5 years, so I've got those, and noting that we'll need to provide further details. So for the unassisted pole failures in 2021 was 4, 2022 also 4, 2023 8, 2024 20, and 2025 20 as well.
So interesting that the numbers increasing, and so has the investigations and contemplation for the risk, given that there is a responsibility to keep both the team members and the public safe around the increasing event of unassisted pole failures?
Through the Minister, we'll need to, there's quite a few questions in that we'll need to give you the breakdown, but certainly there's been a group set up within the business for a period of time now to look at unassisted pole failures with a number of recommendations. Now, one of the things that you need to look at is the age of the poles, and as you've seen before in previous years, occasionally there will be peaks, so it could be that those poles were put in at a certain point in time.
But if you're inspecting poles every 5 years and the age of the pole is greater than 5, that you would imagine the inspection rotation will pick that up.
Certainly, but as the age of the pole gets older, you are talking about assets that generally last 50 plus years. So as the age of the poles get older, that risk does increase. So one of the key findings that the group has found and also since implemented is Tas Networks was one of the first companies to use an electronic IMT drill, which drills a 2.5 millimetre hole through the pole instead of what a lot of other network businesses did was a large hole. That produces an electronic signature both for the hardness of the pole and the composition. So what we've done is looked at changing the parameters of that pole of the drill and the test. So we have made some changes to that, and that's already started over the last couple of months to tighten up the parameter.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just recently.
Just recently, yes, that's correct.
So it is a front of mind issue for Tas Networks.
Absolutely correct. As well as looking at my understanding with the other poles that we've only had the one composite pole fail, which the assessment was made that was brought down due to a tree falling down on other assets and the asset actually pulling the pole down as opposed to...
Specifications of the poles, I'm interested, that might be the one that was close to home.
It may have been. I think we've only had one recently.
I'd be happy to give detail on that.
Yeah, so my understanding is that these poles are highly specified to withstand, serious storm events and also other related infrastructure impacts. And I suppose then I'm going to have a big question on notice, but particularly with this new pole, a pole that failed below its specifications. So it should have been able to withhold...
It did not fail below its specifications. So that pole, it's what we call a Titan pole, which is a concrete spun fibre pole. And we put those in critical locations.
Was this in Bass?
It was in Legana.
Yeah. We're just talking about the same thing, that's all.
Yeah, for sure. It was outside a pharmacy in Legana.
And hence the line of questioning around public and team safety.
This happened during the storm event that occurred. And what occurred was that pole did not fail, but adjacent poles failed because, as Michael has said, a tree came down in the storm, and the combined effect of the wind, which was of the order of 140 kilometres an hour, and the mechanical load of the conductor pulling down literally twisted the pole, and so it didn't fail unassisted. It was very much an assisted failure. It held up to specification, but when adjacent structures failed because of a tree coming down, it was an engine.
On all its specifications.
We believe that our inspection shows that that pole performed to spec, but it failed because of adjacent pole failures that failed as a result of a tree coming down. So it was a ripple effect, a sequence of effects, but it did meet its specifications. We're confident that type of pole performs mechanically, if you will, stands up to wind speeds in excess. We've specified wind speeds in excess of 148 kilometres an hour. It's supposed to resist that. And we have also tested it with respect to bushfire as well. So it's a good product.
Required to withstand the mechanical reference that you made. So my questioning has been more about non-wind events, which is where I'm interested in, which is what we've been talking about, but this one was in a wind event.
Yeah.
In climate resilience, we're going to be needing to make sure our assets are able to withstand wind events, which will require multiple failures along a line. So, what is the mechanical expectation of those poles? You use the word mechanical. I'm not sure that that's right, but like the torque or the pressure or the whatever.
Yeah. So we are very conscious of the climate change, of course, and the impact it's had in our assets. So we're seeking to make our assets more resilient.
What's
through
the unit
climate
of measure of the mechanical expectation of the poles?
So what we, just before I get to that detail, we've arranged different options in terms of making our assets more resilient. Certainly putting in Titan poles is one of those, but we also put in covered conductor so that it is more resistant to vegetation blowing in. We occasionally have a mechanical failure because of a large tree coming in from out of easement, but it's more typically in climate events, and certainly the storm event of October of 24. It was wind-blown vegetation from outside of the easement that was the major cause of failure, and the way we were dealing with that is we are putting in covered conductor on our assets that is more resistant to that. So that's the approach we're taking. But it's going to take a number of different efforts, both in equipment and in resilience generally, to make sure that we're more resistant to climate events.
That it performed
We're going to
due to
move
its
on.
specification. He mentioned
We'll
that it
move on
performed due to
because you have
specification.
had
He didn't tell me
quite
what
a lot of
specification
questions.
was.
I'll be happy to give you that specification. I don't have it to hand.
I'm
right
just
now.
getting